Hey, what's up everybody, Eric here, and today we're going to go over how to prepare your countertop with a plywood deck. So let's get to it. Around here in the Bay Area, a lot of people are using 1.5" quartz or granite. So let's pretend that this is our 1.5" countertop edge. So this is the height of the countertop, and then this is the stone surface on top. So it would look something like this when it's installed. And then in this video, I'm going to focus on primarily frameless cabinets. So meaning when you open a cabinet, there's no wood frame around in the front, and it's just the front edge of the plywood or the particle board box that you have. And with frameless cabinets, a lot of times you have just about 1/8 of an inch from the top of the box to the top of the drawer front. So oftentimes when people are doing prep, I'm always reminding them that to build up this countertop deck, you want to use 3/4 inch plywood instead of 5/8 or even 1/2 inch that is common for a lot of the face frame cabinet construction. Because if this is not lifted high enough, the bottom edge of the stone is going to sit directly on the top edge of the drawer front, and it's going to prevent it from opening smoothly. It's going to scrape. So that's point number one that I want to make, is to make sure you have enough height in the plywood deck. And even if you don't use 3/4 thick plywood, you can at least have the fabricator or the installer make sure that as they're gluing this down, they're using shims to raise its height properly, so you don't have an issue with your edge rubbing on your drawer front. Okay, so that's tip number one. And then tip number two is every now and then we do some designs where we have an additional side panel. So right now what you see here is a finished side, meaning the side of the cabinet box is finished to the same as the front of the doors. So we've we've used a stained gray walnut here in this case, and you put a top coat on top of this. When we apply a side panel, this could be a decorative door with the same door pattern on the side, and we just plant on the door like this. Or it might just be a plain panel that's just flat. So they both have their own uses for different scenarios. So especially for a more modern contemporary look, you might not even have a front design on the door at all. It might just be a flat door. So your flat side panel would just be installed to the side like this. And what I recommend doing is usually to bring this panel out front so it's flush with the door rather than flush with the cabinet box. I think it just looks a little cleaner. Yes, sure, it requires us to make sure we buy a bigger panel to actually meet the front of the drawer boxes, but we're pretty good at doing that. So yeah, so what this will look like is when it's installed, it's going to be flush with the drawer front. And how that changes for the plywood deck is, I see sometimes people are bringing out the plywood to the side of this panel here. And I like that idea a little bit less, because what happens is, let me put this down for a minute. So, because what happens is, say this is a standard depth cabinet box that's 24 inches deep. Usually countertops are overhanging 1.5 inches to the front. So we've got 24 inches here to the box. To the front of the doors and drawers, you're usually at 7/8 of an inch. It's 3/4 thick material, and then you have a door bumper and all that. So at 24 and 7/8 here, and then front of the countertop here at 25.5, that means you have a difference of 5/8 inch difference from the front of the counter to the front of the door. And that's what you'll eventually see. That's what you'll ultimately see when the job is installed and complete. What happens here is, if you look at the way this plywood is, I'm going to hold this back a little more. The proper way to install the plywood is to have it flush with the cabinet box at 24. It means that there's a 1.5 inch difference from front edge of plywood to front edge of countertop. That's all fine when there's no side panel, so it comes around. You maintain the 1.5 inch difference. Now, if there's no side panel, I would actually suggest to bring the plywood back a little bit more from the very edge of the cabinet box, so When it's installed, I would try to maintain the finished cabinet dimension at 5/8 in difference to the front edge of the countertop, so that all looks consistent across the side. How that changes when we have another end panel here, 3/4 end panel here, is if this plywood was to come out flush here, I really just need another hand. But yeah, so if this plywood was to come out flush here, then it's gonna look like this in the front, where you have a 5/8 inch difference from front edge of the countertop to the door. And then you're gonna have an 1.5 inch difference from the side edge of the countertop to the side panel. So if we were to just keep this back at the corner there, now we will have our consistent 5/8 from the front edge of the countertop to the door, and then as it comes around, it will still remain the same at 5/8 from front edge here to your side panel. So that's my little tip. Hope this is useful, and if you like this content, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.